Welcome to another episode of the Empowered Half Hour. I am so excited to share today's guest with you. Her name is Kristy Olinger, and we are in the same mastermind group. You might have met Sue, Kim, Stacy, and I think that's it so far, but we are powerful women coming up to change the world. Kristy, welcome to the show.
Oh my gosh, Becca, thank you so much for having me. I'm delighted to be here.
I'm so happy to have you too. So I always like to read the formal bio so that the audience gets a chance to know you more professionally. So I'm just going to read that and then we'll jump into the interview. All right, here we go. Kristy Olinger is a 20-year veteran of corporate life who knows that soft skills are the hardest thing we do at work. As a communication consultant and speaker, Kristy helps teams and individuals to communicate better at work through interactive programs. It's true, I've heard all about them. They're wonderful, that deliver practical solutions that translate with ease to everyday work life. Kristy is also the host of The Opposite of Small Talk, a podcast for curious people interested in personal and professional growth. Once again, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It always feels strange to hear people talk about you in such a formal way. I appreciate the energy behind it.
Yes, I had to insert, I've seen some of these tools. They're very cool. I get to talk to you all the time. And I think some of the things that I find very fascinating is how you've taken your 20-year experience and really turned it into helping people, like you said in your bio, have a better work-life experience because they're learning communication skills to make it easier. It also elevates them in their career. And I'm just really interested to hear the backstory of what made you pop up and start being the mentor and the teacher in your work world.
Back in the day, 20 years ago, I used to find any excuse I could to speak at work. I'm just one of those people that enjoys public speaking. I'm a student of Toastmasters. I went on to win a national speaking competition, which was really thrilling. And I just found that I enjoyed speaking as a hobby, if you will. And so I was teaching workshops around workplace communication, basically. And I was doing it inside the companies where I worked and for free at local nonprofits. And then I happened to go to a leadership summit that I was invited to participate in. And one of the segments was around communication. And as this person is giving their workshop, Becca, I can't even tell you how closely aligned it was with my content. They used the same TED Talk clip that I use. They used some of the same interactive things. My jaw was absolutely on the floor. And that was the moment when I was like, maybe I could do this for money instead of just doing it for free. Maybe there's something of real value here. And over the years, what it's evolved to is that I found I had a personal challenge with communication where I had gotten a little further along into the midpoint of my career and accepted a role in strategy where communication becomes super challenging. Because if you're trying to decide a direction, often there's more than one right way to go. So getting buy-in from people that you don't directly report to you, that's a really advanced communication skill. And what I found is that there weren't any resources for me. There was off-the-shelf stuff from HR that wasn't tailored to what I was going through to be helpful. And I wasn't at a senior level, so they weren't going to give me a communication coach for the cost of what that is. And so I became really passionate about helping the me from 10 years ago, the person who was stuck and trying to fumble to figure out workplace communication on my own. How can I build products and programs that can help those people in sort of the mid-level, which is the hardest level in corporate America by far. And so that's how I started.
I completely agree. And one thing that I really like about what you said that I'd like to talk a little bit more about is that mid-level. I find it the hardest. A lot of people get promoted into these roles based upon performance. And like you said, and when you are at a senior level, there's tons of money that's dumped into development. You're lucky at a mid-level if you get thrown into a leadership class, let alone a communication class. So I feel that your work is super important, but talk a little bit more about that, if you can, expand upon that middle group and why communication is so important for them.
Yeah, look, I think it's funny because as a business owner, you think a lot about the words you use and how you position yourself, right? So when I first started, I used to say that I teach communication that will help you crush your goals because that's what I'm interested in. I'm a high achiever like you, Becca. So that's what
Yes.
I'm interested in. But when I really thought about it, the pain point is that soft skills are hard. And these interpersonal relationships, there are a ton of people out there who are just dealing with a ton of stress and drama and trauma from their workplace interactions because soft skills are hard. Anyway, I want to put it out there that when you improve your ability to communicate with people and really your ability to collaborate and work with others, it helps you in every aspect of your life. It's not about just your job. It can also help you in how you handle your relationships with friends, with kids, with partners. And so I just think there's a ton of value in learning it. And there's a huge myth out there that communication is something that you're born with. Oh, well, she was just born to be a public speaker. That's not the case. It's a skill. And just like any skill, it gets better with practice.
That's so true. Me too. I'm an extrovert. I've always loved speaking, but that doesn't mean I was making impact. That doesn't mean I was connecting. It doesn't mean that I was moving the ball forward, especially in business. So I had to learn that craft. So I'm so happy that the audience got to hear you double click down in that. The other thing before I ask you the next big question is that I'd like to talk a little bit, because I think as we talk about middle management, not having the soft skills, things like that, there's also, regardless where you are in your rank in the organization, that cross-functional team communication or business partners, it's called something different in every organization, but you're kind of talking about strategy and connecting with teams. And I think one of the things that in my later part of my career has helped me is that I've started understanding that my cross-functional teams. And then I had to learn the skill to actually communicate in their language on how it would impact the business. So anyway, sounds simple, but it's not. So I just wanted to get your 2 cents on that.
I completely agree, Becca. It's critical. The thing that I think people forget about that can be so valuable here is building relationships. Because you said it in your answer, you have to be able to talk about things in the terms that they understand and are important to them. And the best way to know that is to get to know people. And so I dedicate a lot of my time each week, each month, each year to simply meeting with people and asking, hey, how are things going? What are you working on? What's important to you right now? Because knowing those things is really how we're going to be able to collaborate, because I'm going to be able to see that connection from what I'm trying to do and what they're looking to do. And then we'll be able to work together a lot easier.
Yeah. I really like that you threw those questions out too, because that's straight practical for you guys as listeners. What are you working on? What's important to you? What are you challenged with? If you start asking those open-ended questions, it will increase your ability to communicate. So we can take this question one or two angles. The next question is, what did you have to overcome to be the Kristy you are today? And I don't know if you want to take that from what have you had to overcome in your career, or what did you have to overcome in wanting to stand up to be a speaker and a facilitator in this space? So whichever way you want to take it.
Yeah, so it's funny too, because I know we're going to talk about both the obstacles and the learning. And to me, those things often go very hand in hand. You learn the most from the things that are obstacles. From a very practical perspective, when I was sitting in that workshop and I decided that I should be doing workshops of my own, in that moment, I had zero online presence or brand. I had a Facebook page that I used to post pictures of my dog and my kids. And I had a LinkedIn profile that hadn't been updated in years. And that was it. And so that to me was an obstacle that turned into a huge opportunity for learning, because what I figured out is that we're in this environment where there's opportunity to deliver all these little micro learnings on these platforms that are so helpful in just understanding what people are really wanting and needing and the value of the things that I can bring into the world. In these small little environments, I think it can be easy to think that you have to spend a lot of time and create the perfect end product. So like the perfectionism piece of us.
Yeah, I've struggled with that.
Yeah. But really, there's so much more value in just this test and learn and iterative exploration. And there's certainly been failures in there, but it wasn't a big deal because it was just sort of all part of the process. So I think the obstacle was having no online presence or brand, but also no knowledge or training about how to run a business or produce anything was a pretty big obstacle for me. I was pretty green.
Yeah, I can relate. Just standing up from scratch was quite an experience.
Yes.
So you talked a little bit about the lesson within that. Let me ask, what have you learned or what's a big aha from a different perspective? What have you seen as an aha from the people you have impacted or taught to?
I think the biggest aha that comes from people taking my workshops is that learning happens on the job. And that's tough for someone to say when I'm trying to convince people to bring me in to do workshops that are formal training, quote unquote. But really, soft skills, we learn them through practicing. You learn them by
Yes.
trying things and seeing what works for you. And so that to me is the biggest aha that people get from working with me, is realizing that simply by paying closer attention to what you're doing every day, there's something to learn everywhere you look.
I love that. I think you have a unique ability to take what you're learning and make it practical. Not everybody has that skill, but since we're talking about skills, one thing that I find fascinating as we work in our mastermind group is that the learning happens, like you said, in the work environment. And so you're creating apps and things and challenges to help them build their soft skills once you're done. Talk a little bit about that because I find that world completely fascinating, like what you're doing.
Yeah, one of the things that I love is just the accessibility of technology these days makes it a little bit easier. And so when I was thinking through this problem of people learn on the job, but I'm out here selling workshops, how can I extend the value of those by helping people to practice every day? And so we have a platform, a challenge platform that helps people by giving them micro learnings through an app that they can then use in their everyday work life, but then also check back in with themselves, like a digital journal where you can say, hey, like I tried that strategy and it didn't go so well. Why is that? So you can learn from it as you go and get a little inspiration and encouragement to continue to learn way after the workshop's over.
Yeah, that's awesome. So I want to ask you, you've kind of oozed it so far, but why are you passionate about this topic?
Oh gosh. Well, I'm one of those people that I'm a multi-passionate person, right? So related to communication, I think we already talked a little bit about how it can just have reverberate a positive influence throughout all aspects of your life. But I think beyond that, the value of being a lifelong learner, I appreciate your compliment about my ability to teach. That did not come naturally to me. But what I found is that you learn something so much deeper when you need to teach it to someone else. And so, this idea of being a lifelong learner, having a growth mindset, being willing to try something before you know how to do it, brought so much depth to my life and so many wonderful things just in the last 5 years alone that I really would encourage listeners to think about being open to learning things that you've never done before. One of the best things that I've learned is to start before you're ready, because you're never going to feel ready to do something that you've never done before, but that doesn't mean that you can't do it.
I love that advice so much. In my own journey too, I think that being A type, high achiever, I've struggled with perfectionism a lot. I'm also a huge risk taker because I'm in sales. So I have this weird dichotomy within me, but that perfectionism piece has held me back from trying something new. I might be willing to take the risk, but I am struggling with what step to take because I don't know step four. I can only see
Yeah.
step one and step two. So I really appreciate that share from you because it's so important. I can't tell you that both Kristy and I have platforms, we're doing things, but it didn't happen just because we snapped our fingers and said go. It took a courageous step, then the next courageous step. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this process. But for me, it was kind of like as I took each step, then I got clarity and I understood what the next steps look like. And that part of the process, I always get questions from like listeners and from my own clients of like, how did you do it? And that's why I kind of wanted to geek out for a second and just talk a little bit more about how. So I'll let
I,
you go.
I think it's to not take yourself so seriously and realize that life is a great experiment. I'm going to tell you the story of two different programs. So I had this idea that I was going to do a digital course. And so I spent hours and hours recording the course, figuring out how I was going to market the course. I hired a designer to help me with the workbook. I did all of these things, and all of that without really consulting with my followers about what they wanted or needed. And you can guess that it completely flopped. And then at the same time, I was doing these TikToks, and they were awesome. They were so fun to do, and people seemed to be really liking them. And someone reached out to me and said, "Hey, Kristy, like, can you do a workshop that's based on your TikToks so that we could look at a bunch of them and then maybe we talk about a couple of them?" And of course, I hadn't thought of that. This was a brand new idea to me. And I'm like, sure, of course I can do that. That sounds awesome. Now that's the most popular workshop that I do. I called it TikTok workshop, and then people thought it was a workshop about how to make TikToks, so it didn't do so well. So I called it Soft Skills Are Hard, and we do these 5-minute videos where you learn 12 different communication strategies, and then we let the audience decide which strategies you learn more about. It's just this example of letting go of the perfectionism and test and learn, right? I didn't know if that TikTok workshop thing was going to work, but I was willing to try it, and it didn't take a ton of effort and energy or perfectionism to do it. I used TikToks that had typos in them. I just did it. And it
That's
resonated because it was
awesome.
real. So to me, I feel like the opposite of perfectionism is test and learn and just not taking yourself too seriously.
I love that. And I'm actually going to take some of that advice because I have been straight up terrified of TikTok. Like video has been my nemesis. I'm like, I'm so talkative and I love people and I don't mind when I'm co-regulating with somebody, right? I'm like all in, but when it's just me and the camera, I'm like, oh. You've seen me get weird when we talk about it on the group. I'm like, oh man, I got to do that. So I want to ask another question about communication specifically. All right, so let's put ourselves in the middle of a corporate environment. And let's just say that we have someone that is, maybe one of our listeners is trying to go for a promotion and is trying to learn those soft skills. What type of advice would you have for somebody who's looking to accelerate their career within the corporate infrastructure around communication?
Well, I'm so glad that you've had Sue Barber on the podcast because to me, visibility is a big part of getting promoted, 100%. And people struggle with that. A lot of visibility has to do with communication. How are you speaking up in meetings? People have different feelings and opinions around that. People struggle to speak up in meetings for a variety of reasons, power dynamics, introversion, just not wanting to be on the spot, all of those things. But that to me is a skill to work on because if people don't know, it's just the only way that you can demonstrate that you understand the business and that you have a perspective about the direction that things are going. You've got to be able to speak up at work.
I completely agree. I think that it goes back to the perfectionism thing that we were just talking about, that especially when you're going for a promotion, you might feel like you have to have it all right. I need to be perfect. Everyone needs to know that I understand the business. And so then perhaps you might not be speaking up as much. So I really like that you took it that way.
And let me give you a couple of thoughts that people can think about how to speak up at work more. I like to say off the cuff doesn't mean off the top of your head. So before you go into a big meeting, take a few moments to think about what is the purpose of this meeting, who's going to be in the meeting, and what questions might they ask. You can actually plan for what would you say or ask if different topics come up. And you should know what's coming up because there should be a purpose of the meeting. And if there's not, maybe don't go to that meeting. But that's a whole other topic on running effective meetings. So actually take some time to think about what you would have to say and how you would say it. And that's the second thing that I would suggest is just sometimes speaking up, the hardest part is just getting started. And so I actually have a free resource I call the Phrase Bank, which is a simple set of phrases that are things that you can use in common work scenarios. And so it just helps people. They can try on these different phrases and see what resonates with them. How are you going to start the conversation? It's up to you to figure out what you're going to say afterwards, but how do you speak up if you disagree with something? How would you even start that sentence?
Ooh.
And the fact is, we're so in our body and the fight or flight mode. If we need to say something and it's a disagreement, that's really hard for people. And so how do you help people to get started? And so that's what that Phrase Bank's about. I
really appreciate that you brought that up because I think that's another area where people don't speak up at work is the potential for conflict or the potential for a disagreement. So instead of saying something, they stay silent. And I can say, I just pull the experience into myself. The times I have stayed silent, I have seen it impact the business. If I would have said this, we might have been ahead of it. I'm very strategic and a visionary, so I see patterns sometimes a little faster than other people. and I have not voiced myself in the past, which I know was a mistake.
Well, and I think the challenge too is that inherently in a corporate environment, there's a hierarchy, right? And so I
Yes.
think it's very hard if you're in a room with more powerful people to feel like you should speak up because ultimately they are the end decision makers for it. But I like to explain to people when you think about it, in many companies, there is so much going on that we cannot expect our leaders to know things as intimately as we do. We're much closer to it. And so if you don't raise that
Mhm.
point, they're not even going to know. So they may ultimately override you, and that's fine because that's sort of the way things are set up. But if you don't say anything, then you're part of the problem.
I like mic drop, guys. Like, that was so good. That was so good. All right. So we've talked a lot about communication being a soft skill that somebody can take with them both in and out of work. But if someone really embraced learning this soft skill, how could it empower them more?
It will help you to get things done easier. Again, back to my main hypothesis or my main positioning for myself. It's not just about achieving things, it's about making life easier. We spend a third of our time at work. And so if we can get our workplace communication skills on point so that we can have better relationships, that just sort of eases the whole experience. I like to say that my vision for the company is to eliminate the Sunday scaries. So I don't know if you're familiar
Oh
with
my
the
gosh.
Sunday scaries, but that idea that like you start to have these feelings as it's late on Sunday night and you know you're going to have to go back to the office. That's the most heartbreaking thing to me. I have loved my corporate experiences so
Me
much, and
too.
it doesn't mean I haven't had difficult times and difficult people. But generally speaking, Mondays are my favorite days, and I'm always excited to get to work. And so I want everyone to be able to feel that way. And a lot of it has to do with our relationships. And that's communication.
I appreciate you saying that too, because sometimes think people think I'm a weirdo because I love my corporate career. I've loved it. I also love being an entrepreneur. So I'm multi-passionate as well. So I kind of have to have my hands in multiple things to fill life and feel fulfilled. However, I love my career, and I really want to just encourage listeners that if you're in corporate life, which I know a lot of you are, and that you are struggling with corporate happiness, I have a couple of different things. One, go back and listen to this again because there's probably some soft skills in here that you can take away to apply to your career now. And then also, perhaps there's an opportunity for you to explore your own strengths and what you enjoy doing and align to a different role. I don't know if you have any comments on that,
Oh my
Kristy,
gosh.
but
I have so many
sometimes it's a
comments.
role-based unhappiness and not actually corporate unhappiness.
For sure. And I actually went through an entire career change after 20 years working in consumer credit cards. So I'm in the banking industry. I decided that I was going to follow my strengths and passions and start a career in HR in the development space. And so that was really scary because I've got all 20 years of knowledge about this product and regulations and how you sell credit cards and all of these things that I was like, gosh, I'm going to walk away from this and I'm going to step into something brand new where I know nothing. But because it's so closely aligned to both my strengths and my interests. So to me, that's the key. It's not just what you're good at because you can be good at things that you don't like. So it's
Yes.
both what you're good at and what you're interested in. And when you can do that and get into a career or a role that aligns those things, it's just a whole nother level.
Oh man, that just made me so happy. I'm like, see guys, corporate happiness is possible.
Yeah. Yeah.
So good. Well, I want to start winding down the interview. We've talked about two things. We've talked about individuals learning the soft skills and also you speaking to corporations so that you can get to their audience. So what I'd like to ask first is if we have leaders listening or anybody that wants to engage you for a workshop, what's the best way to do that?
Yeah, KristyOllinger.com. All of the contact information is there. I actually put my cell phone number out there and say, text me, like I'm that open. So just
That's
let's set up
awesome.
some time and you can see what programs I have to offer. But typically it's best to have a conversation to understand what your specific team is dealing with and what pain points I
Yeah.
can help to solve.
And you mentioned TikTok, and I know a lot of the listeners are big TikTokers. So go ahead and share all your social handles and how people can follow you.
Yes, on both TikTok and Instagram, I'm at ko.communication. I'm on LinkedIn as well, but I would say Instagram is probably the platform that I'm on the most, and I give away everything for free. I have this mentality, again, that if you're in the mid-level of your career, you're not getting the resources from your company that you should. So I give away everything. And the hope is just that if you find yourself in a spot where you need to hire a speaker or bring someone in to help your team, that you'll think of me. So come get all the free content and apply it in your life and improve your workplace communication to make your work life easier.
I love that. So I would love to close it out with what would be a closing tip or a piece of advice that you would give the listeners regarding communication?
I'm going to give a piece of advice that I would say, oh gosh, I have to give two.
No, go do
Okay.
two. I love
here-
two. More.
Here's two.
I always love
So
more.
our sign off for the podcast is stay curious and talk big. So I think curiosity is just one of those magical things that if you can explore the questions that you have about life, you're going to learn a ton of things. And that would be one piece. And then the second one is something that I've had on every page of my website since I've had this business. At the very bottom, it says love is a verb. And basically what that means is that if you want to feel love, that warm feeling, the noun of love, you have to act in loving ways. That's just sort of a personal philosophy and sort of a way that I try to be. So I think it's worth sharing.
I love that. And I think I just love you more now. I'm like, oh, I love love. So anyways, well, thank you so much for coming on the Empowered Half Hour. It was awesome to have you as a guest.
Thank you, Becca. I love what you're doing here, sharing these stories and putting everything out into the world like this. It's just phenomenal. So congratulations on your podcast.
Thank you so much.